It began with a story that seemed destined for history books. On July 27, 2025, the world woke to headlines announcing that Ibrahim Traoré, the youngest head of state on the African continent, had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Commentators and analysts wasted no time in drawing comparisons to icons of peace and resistance. Mandela, Gandhi, Martin Luther King. His name was suddenly spoken in the same breath as those towering figures. For a continent so often denied its rightful recognition, this nomination looked like the ultimate validation, a long-awaited acknowledgement that Africa could not only lead itself but also inspire the world. But what followed would shake the foundations of that narrative. Just 3 days later, the same young leader who had captured the global imagination stunned the international community by rejecting the nomination outright. His words were as sharp as they were unexpected. The Nobel, he declared, was not an award for peace, but a political trap, a velvet chain designed to bind rather than liberate, carefully crafted by the world's most powerful economies. With that single declaration, Traoré transformed the conversation. What had been considered the pinnacle of prestige was suddenly cast as a tool of power politics. The timing made the shock even more profound. In Western capitals, the nomination was being celebrated as evidence of progress, a symbolic recognition of Africa's new leadership. Yet Traoré's response cut through the applause with a piercing question: progress for whom? If recognition came entangled with dependency, conditional aid, and diplomatic strings, could it still be called recognition? Was the Nobel truly a prize? Or was it a leash? His defiance forced not only politicians but ordinary citizens around the globe to reconsider what peace really means when defined by those who profit from conflict. The financial stakes made his stand even more dramatic. Global foundations linked to Nobel laureates manage billions of dollars, influencing aid, research, and policy. Accepting the prize often brings not just prestige, but access to speaking tours, partnerships, and indirect funding streams worth hundreds of millions. By refusing it, Traoré walked away from immense material advantage. For his critics, this was reckless arrogance. For his supporters, it was the boldest act of African independence in decades. The reaction split sharply along familiar lines. Major Western newspapers framed the nomination as a symbol of stability, reconciliation, and the promise of a new era. African commentators, however, saw the rejection as the unveiling of a hidden agenda, a calculated attempt to wrap a leader of resistance in golden chains. Suddenly, what had seemed like a crowning moment of progress became a battleground over sovereignty and legitimacy. Inside Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital, the atmosphere was electric. In a closed council meeting, Traoré reportedly told his advisors, "They want to crown me only to control me. I will never be their puppet." By July 30th, a formal letter had been dispatched to Oslo. Its language was clear and uncompromising. The Nobel, it said, was not a badge of honor, but a false symbol, a tool of control dressed up as recognition. The news spread rapidly across digital platforms. Within hours, hashtags like #NobelTrap and #TrueSovereignty were trending not just in Africa, but across Asia and Latin America, uniting voices from the global south around a single act of defiance. The shockwaves reverberated far beyond Burkina Faso. In Washington, analysts warned that the country risked losing nearly $500 million in U.S. aid. On CNN, commentators called the act reckless, a symbolic gesture that could jeopardize real economic lifelines. On Fox News, others posed a different question. Was the Nobel itself compromised? The debate escalated further when Donald Trump, still wielding influence in economic circles, openly admitted that the Nobel might indeed be a political trap. Rarely had an American figure voiced so bluntly what many suspected, that the prize often serves as an extension of Western soft power. In Paris, the reaction was furious. French President Emmanuel Macron reportedly slammed his fist on a table during a cabinet meeting, calling the rejection an insult to the moral order of the international community. For France, Already reeling from African pushback in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso itself, Traore's refusal was more than a snub. It was a direct challenge. German officials were more cautious but equally concerned, describing the act as a diplomatic breach and warning privately of a domino effect that could spread across the global south. In Tokyo, the language was subtler. Japan, with its carefully cultivated reputation as a partner in African development, noted the refusal as a sign of eroding trust in international systems. Unlike Washington or Paris, Tokyo did not call it reckless. It diagnosed it as evidence that global governance itself had lost credibility. Social media magnified the drama. In Lagos, Nairobi, and Johannesburg, students recorded videos praising the courage of defiance. In Sao Paulo and Mexico City, activists linked his rejection to their own battles against financial dependency. Even in London and New York, diaspora communities took to the streets, waving placards declaring, "Dignity has no price." Within 48 hours, clips of Traore's speech rejecting the Nobel had been viewed more than 40 million times. Few actual Nobel ceremonies had ever generated such raw global resonance. The financial world reacted with equal intensity. Risk profiles for Burkina Faso were recalculated overnight. Credit default swap spreads widened, reflecting investor anxiety. Yet, paradoxically, gold exports from the country saw an uptick in futures trading as speculators bet that Africa might increasingly pivot away from Western financial frameworks. Analysts even whispered about the possibility of new trade arrangements denominated not in dollars, but in yuan or rubles. Could a single act of refusal unsettle commodity flows and chip away at the dollar's dominance? Across Africa, the symbolism deepened. In Mali, students spoke of golden handcuffs. In Ghana, newspapers framed the act as a second Nkrumah moment, invoking the spirit of Pan-African independence. In Nigeria, economists debated whether rejecting Western symbols could inspire greater financial autonomy, while in South Africa, activists drew parallels to Mandela's uncompromising dignity during apartheid negotiations. By July's end, Ouagadougou hosted the Spirit of Traoré Festival. Tens of thousands gathered in Independence Square waving banners that read, "Dignity is our currency." Local economists estimated the event generated over $50 million in revenue, symbolic proof that sovereignty itself could be an economic driver. Cultural life reflected the moment. Poets, musicians, and artists began reimagining Africa not as a continent waiting for validation, but as one defining its own narrative. Universities added the event to civic education lessons. Professors in Dakar and Addis Ababa hosted debates on post-colonial recognition and African agency. Students in Kinshasa painted murals of Traoré under the words, "We are not for sale." This was not orchestrated propaganda. It was a spontaneous groundswell, a sense that a psychological ceiling had been broken. Meanwhile, governance on the ground began to shift. Revenues from nationalized gold mines were redirected into schools, hospitals, and renewable energy projects. Within a year, nearly 200,000 new students were enrolled in education programs. Solar fields lit villages that had lived in darkness for generations. Farmers received subsidies for sustainable agriculture. For many in Burkina Faso, these achievements felt like a stronger testament to peace than any medal from Oslo could provide. Internationally, the act became a case study in soft power. Analysts in Beijing, Moscow, and New Delhi noted that Traoré had undermined one of the West's most potent psychological tools. If an African leader could reject the Nobel, might others soon walk away from IMF loans, World Bank conditions, or European trade agreements? Was this the first crack in a system of controlled legitimacy that had lasted for decades? And yet, the risks were undeniable. Western donors hinted at reduced aid. Credit agencies raised borrowing costs. Some local critics feared the country might pay too steep a price for its pride. But in Ouagadougou, ordinary citizens countered with a different calculation. "Better to lose a dollar given with strings than to lose our future bought with silence," one street vendor told journalists. That sentiment captured the paradox of the moment. The Nobel had long been sold as a crown of honor. To Traoré, it was a golden shackle. By refusing it, he awarded his people something greater, the possibility of dignity without compromise. The echoes spread far beyond Africa. In Latin America, leaders in Venezuela and Cuba praised the decision. In the Philippines, students marched with slogans declaring dignity before dollars. In the Middle East, the Arab League invited Traoré to deliver a special address. Iranian and Turkish outlets framed his act as part of a new Bandung spirit, recalling the 1955 conference that united Asia and Africa against colonial dominance. Across continents, the rejection became more than an African story. It became a rallying point for all who questioned the legitimacy of global institutions controlled by a handful of powerful states. As the dust settled, three truths stood out. First, the rejection was not just about Burkina Faso. It was a mirror reflecting global disillusionment with Western institutions. Second, the backlash revealed the fragility of soft power tools once thought untouchable. And third, the conversation had irreversibly shifted. People were no longer asking whether Traoré was right or wrong. They were asking what his refusal meant for the future of global governance. So the question remains, by turning down the Nobel, did Ibrahim Traoré isolate his nation, or did he ignite a movement that will reshape the balance of power in the 21st century? What is certain is this: in rejecting the prize, he forced the world to confront uncomfortable truths about peace, power, and legitimacy. And as one student in Dakar put it simply, he may not have won the Nobel Prize, but he won something far greater, the soul of a continent.